At 39, Marcus got laid off on a Tuesday morning from a job he thought was stable. No warning, no performance issue, no scandal, just a short calendar invite, a polite HR voice, and 15 minutes later, access gone, laptop locked, email disabled, benefits ending soon. By lunch, the routine he had built his entire adult life around was over. What hit him first wasn't panic, it was silence. No Slack notifications, no meetings, no urgency, just a strange, empty quiet that made everything feel unreal. For years, Marcus thought income was the center of his financial life. Work hard, stay useful, keep earning, stay safe. That was the deal. But the moment the job disappeared, he realized something uncomfortable. A paycheck had never just been income. It had been structure, identity, predictability. And in 2026, losing a job doesn't just hit your bank account. It hits your psychology first. That's what most people underestimate. They prepare for the financial stress, at least vaguely. Maybe some savings, maybe severance, maybe unemployment. But almost nobody prepares for what happens mentally when the system you built your life around disappears overnight. Marcus did what most people do in the first 48 hours. He updated his resume, texted a few contacts, opened LinkedIn, told himself to stay calm, productive, controlled. But underneath that movement was something harder to admit. He felt exposed, not because he had no skills, because he realized how much of his emotional stability had been outsourced to a paycheck. And that changes the way job loss feels in 2026. 10 years ago, losing a job felt like a temporary disruption. In 2026, it feels more personal. Hiring is slower, companies are leaner, roles are more fragile, and the illusion of stability is thinner than most people realize. People aren't just afraid of missing one paycheck. They're afraid of how long uncertainty might last. That's the real shock, not the job loss, the timeline risk after it. Marcus had savings, but for the first time in years, he started looking at money differently, not as progress, as runway. Every dollar suddenly had a new emotional weight. Rent wasn't just rent anymore, it was time. Groceries were time. Subscriptions were time. Every expense became a countdown. And that shift changes everything. Because once income stops, money stops feeling like numbers. It starts feeling like survival math. That's the first transformation job loss creates. It forces clarity, fast. What matters, what doesn't, what's useful, what was just habit. The life that looked manageable with income suddenly gets exposed for what it actually costs to maintain. And for most people, that's the first uncomfortable truth. The job was funding more than their needs. It was funding their assumptions. If you're watching this and you've ever thought losing a job is only a financial problem, this is where the real story begins. Make sure you like, subscribe, and join Andrew Finance, because in the next part, we're breaking down what actually changes after the shock wears off, how job loss rewires your money decisions, your habits, and the way you see security in 2026. After the first week, Marcus noticed something strange. The panic didn't disappear. It just changed shape. The shock was gone. The calendar invite was over. The calls had been made. The resume was updated. But now came the part nobody really prepares for. The psychological come-down after job loss. And this is where everything starts changing in ways most people don't expect. Because once the urgency fades, what replaces it is awareness, real awareness. Not just of your bank account, but of how much of your life was quietly built around the assumption that your income would always be there. Marcus started seeing his expenses differently, almost immediately. Things that used to feel small now felt heavier. The streaming subscriptions he barely used, the expensive convenience habits he never questioned, the food delivery that felt harmless when money was coming in. None of it looked irresponsible before, but without a paycheck, every recurring charge started exposing itself. That's one of the first things job loss does in 2026. It strips away financial autopilot. You stop spending based on routine and start spending based on survival. And that shift is brutal, but useful, because for the first time in years, Marcus wasn't looking at money emotionally. He was looking at it structurally. What extends runway? What shortens it? What actually matters? What was just comfort disguised as necessity? And once you start seeing money that way, your entire relationship with spending changes. But the bigger shift wasn't just financial. It was psychological. Marcus realized how much his job had been regulating his sense of worth, not just his income, his identity, the structure, the routine, the daily proof that he was productive, useful, needed. Without that, the days felt different, longer, less defined. And that's what makes job loss dangerous in 2026. Not just because income stops, because identity gets quieter too. A lot of people think losing a job creates financial stress. It does, but what it really creates first is mental drift. You wake up without structure, without urgency, without external validation, and if you're not careful, that turns into hesitation, then avoidance, then paralysis. Marcus felt it happening. The longer he was out, the easier it became to delay, to overthink, to scroll job boards without applying, to confuse planning with action. That's the second transformation job loss creates. It exposes whether your discipline was internal or whether your job was carrying it for you. And in 2026, that matters more than ever, because the market is slower, hiring is colder, and waiting passively is more expensive than people realize. Marcus eventually understood that the real danger wasn't losing the job, it was losing momentum after the job, because income can pause without destroying you. But losing structure, confidence, and forward movement for too long can do damage that lasts much longer than the layoff itself. So he rebuilt routine before results. Same wake-up time, same movement, same work blocks, same pressure to act even when nothing felt urgent, because he realized something critical. In unstable seasons, discipline has to replace certainty. And that's the shift most people never make. If you're in that phase right now, where the shock is gone, but the uncertainty is still sitting there, understand this is the part that decides what happens next. Make sure you like, subscribe, and join Andrew Finance, because in the final part, we're breaking down how losing your job in 2026 can become the moment that quietly rebuilds the way you work, earn, and think about security forever. A few months after losing his job, Marcus stopped thinking about the layoff as the moment his life fell apart. He started seeing it as the moment the illusion broke. Because what the job had really given him was not security, it was the feeling of security. And in 2026, those are no longer the same thing. That was the hardest lesson, but also the most valuable one. Marcus realized the job hadn't made him stable, it had made him dependent on one income stream, one employer, one system, one version of certainty that could disappear in 15 minutes. And once he saw that clearly, the way he thought about work changed permanently. He still wanted income, he still wanted stability, but he no longer confused employment with safety. That shift changed everything. Instead of trying to rebuild the exact life he had before, Marcus started rebuilding differently. He still applied for roles, but now he cared less about title and more about leverage, less about status and more about flexibility, less about what paid the most today and more about what made him less fragile tomorrow. That's the third transformation job loss creates when you survive it correctly. It changes what you optimize for. Before the layoff, Marcus optimized for salary. After the layoff, he optimized for resilience, bigger emergency reserves, lower fixed expenses, more liquid cash, more useful skills, multiple income paths. He stopped seeing financial security as a number and started seeing it as a system. That was the real upgrade. Because once you lose a job in 2026, you stop romanticizing stability. You start building around reality. And reality is simple. Jobs can disappear. Titles can vanish. Companies can cut fast and explain later. So the people who become stronger after job loss are not the ones who rush back into comfort. They're the ones who rebuild with less illusion. Marcus eventually found work again, but he returned differently. He worked with less emotional dependence. He saved more aggressively. He spent with more intention. He treated income less like identity and more like fuel. That changed how he negotiated, how he planned, and how much fear his job actually held over him. And that may be the biggest change of all. Once you've seen how quickly certainty can disappear, you stop building your life around assumptions. You build around adaptability.
That's what job loss in 2026 really teaches, if you let it. Not just how exposed you were, how to become harder to break next time. Marcus used to think financial security meant keeping the job. Now he understood it meant being able to survive without one longer than most people can. That's a completely different kind of confidence, quieter, less visible, but much stronger. So if you're in that season right now where life feels unstable, identity feels shaken, and the future feels harder to trust, understand this clearly. Losing your job can absolutely destabilize your life, but it can also expose the exact weaknesses you needed to see. And if you rebuild correctly, it becomes the moment you stop depending on false security and start building real resilience.
If this video opened your eyes, make sure you subscribe, because what you learn today can save your future tomorrow.